Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number L1, the Wednesday Luncheon Session, International Organized Crime and Terrorism.
Good. Okay, now it's time to move on for lunchtime entertainment. We have a lighter, Hal's going to speak. But first, we want to thank Windows 2000 magazine for sponsoring the lunch. Well, I'm sure all of you who deal with Microsoft products read their magazine. It's pretty much the standard in the industry. And they've got at least one issue a year is all focused specifically on security. And a couple years ago, you couldn't find any magazines dealing with Windows and security. So I started reading them earlier. Years ago, when they were, Windows NT magazine, they changed their names. So I'm wondering if they'll change their name each year as the versions increase. But they also have a new print newsletter, Security Administrator, and they also have a mailing list for security issues. I guess I'm just happy to have them as a sponsor because besides having Microsoft as a sponsor, they're the next best thing in the print world. So with that said, I would like to introduce to you their editor, Mark Joseph Edwards. And Mark is going to be introducing our lunchtime speaker. So let's give Mark a round of applause for putting together such a great magazine.
Good afternoon. My name's Mark, I think. I'm with Windows 2000 magazine. I started to say Windows XP magazine, but still Win2K mag. And as he said, we have a print publication, and we try and include security information every single month. That's a pretty heavy focus for us. So if you aren't a subscriber, check it out. We have some free issues out there on the table, and we have a new publication, Security Administrator Newsletter, which is also a print pub. There's some samples out there for you to take a look at. Be sure and give us any feedback you have on that. This is our first print on that, and we're all ears if there's anything you'd like to see in there. In addition to those two printed pubs, we also offer a website, windowsitsecurity.com, which is part of the Windows 2000 magazine network. It was originally ntsecurity.net, which was a little pet project of mine that I started a number of years ago and wound up merging that with the magazine for various reasons. It worked out really well. And we also publish an electronic newsletter, which I'm the editor of. It's Security Update Newsletter. Comes out once a week. We have probably in the neighborhood of 130, 150,000 readers. And it's pretty well received. If you haven't ever seen it, we cover all the latest security risks that pertain to Microsoft-based applications. Current events, news, tips, facts, new product information, all that kind of good stuff. So, and I'm the one you guys always flame every week, and I like that, so keep it coming. I'm married, that's why I can say that. Our keynote speaker this afternoon is Mr. Howell McConnell. He's a former employee of the NSA. He worked there for 37 years. He served as an analyst, cryptographer, cryptologist, researcher, and a master educator. Today he's retired, but he still works in the security area. One of his pet projects is a threat database that he manages to help people with drug trafficking. I'm reading my notes here. And he is also the docent, which is a glorified way of saying tour guide, according to Hal, of the National Cryptological Museum based in Fort Meade, Maryland. He also conducts spirituality programs in Baltimore, which is kind of an interesting tangent. Today, Hal's going to talk about cryptographic history and organized crime and terrorism. So without further delay, Mr. Howell McConnell.
This little smushed together history. It wasn't that bad. It was kind of interesting. At the very end of the movie, you have the last battle, which is the battle which we won our independence. What battle was that? Yorktown. Poor old Cornwallis is stuck up against the Yorktown Peninsula. And not only was attacking him from the Chesapeake Bay. That was a critical part of the winning of our independence. Before the Battle of Midway, probably the greatest action in terms of its effect on American freedom was the Battle of Yorktown and the French fleet. You know, I got to get this thing. Alrighty. And the French fleet being there at the right time in the right place. My, what a coincidence. And of course, it wasn't a coincidence because the Committee of Secret Correspondence under James Lovell, working for the American Continental Congress, was making them and breaking them. Breaking the British codes and ciphers, which of course they had to keep reusing. And as you scan down here, you'll see Ned Watson's Corps, and you'll see provisions in stores, and you'll see a convoy forming up in Ireland and going to a place called York, and the rest of that is town. And you'll see a date, February. They had so much time in slow-mo warfare that they could send a little packet ship down to the West Indies and get a hold of our friend de Grasse, and he could pull his scattered fleet together and put them in the Chesapeake Bay, awaiting the vital replenishment convoy with reinforcements, shot and shell and powder and medicine. And they, of course, were quite a bit larger than the British convoy, and they were positioned perfectly to take it out. And they cut old Cornwallis off without food, fuel, and ammunition. This was a critical battle, and most people have never seen what I just put up here, which is one of the strategic victories of that war from the National Archives. Here's another one. You'll see a rather famous general mentioned there, good old Benedict, who was now working for the British. Benedict Arnold. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do this or not. I need to put these things somewhere. Put them right in here. So I just like to focus on that very powerful example of how cryptology, the breaking of codes and ciphers and the making of codes and ciphers, was very important to our freedom from the earliest days of this country. If you go to the National Cryptologic Museum, you will find many things. They're not all old. Some of them are rather new. Most of you recognize what that is, of course. It's a, quote, early cray. $20 million worth of computer. We have 3 of the supercomputers there for folks to look at, a Frostburg and a later model Cray and various other aspects of modern technology. And of course, we talk about how they fit into the making and breaking of code, ciphers, and the providing of computer security and network security. But the most fascinating part of the museum usually has to do with the World War II equipments, especially the Enigma, which I understand they're going to bring down for, what is it, the June conference? And the breaking of the Enigma was critical. The Poles were the first ones to break it. Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rzycki, and Henry Zagowski, the Polish mathematical cryptanalytical geniuses, working with the French and the British. And in 1938, when the Germans made a major change and added 2 more wheels to the box that you could put in the little container here, then the problem went to Bletchley Park and to the great Alan Turing, who you all know, and he was the one who devised the machine, to the large version of the machine, to break the Enigma. The Enigma was critical in the Battle of the Atlantic, finding out when the submarines were going to attack and where, and when they'd be vulnerable for refueling. This is the machine that you will see there. It's kind of a crude parallel processor. It's an analog. It has the same parts, if you will, as 60 Enigmas, and you have calculating circuits that are looking for statistical variations that'll tell you you've got the setting. There weren't 1 or 2 or 30. By the end of the war, there was 110 of these machines alone in Naval Security Group headquarters in Washington, D.C., working night and day to break these messages, particularly the naval messages that enabled them to destroy the Armada, 1,162 submarines, most of them destroyed, because we knew where they were attacking and when, and we were breaking, we the British especially, but later on the Americans were breaking the cipher. So this was very important. Breaking the Enigma in North Africa enabled us, the British, and later on the Americans, but primarily the British, to know what Rommel was going to do ahead of time, to use deception against him in the Great Battle of El Alamein, to deceive into leaving North Africa and going home, because the battle wasn't going to start for another week and a half. Because we could read his communications, we knew when the convoys were coming with his vital supplies, and the British were able to destroy them. In the air war in the early part, where Britain was hanging on by her fingernails, she didn't have enough Spitfires and Hurricanes to shoot down the 3 or 4 different raids coming in at the same time. But by breaking the Air Force Enigma of Germany, they knew which were the main raids and which was the one main raid, which were the diversionary ones, so they could move the Spitfires and Hurricanes to the precise bases close enough to do the most damage. So Churchill could say, never was so much owed by so many to so few. Not without the Enigma. If they had been able to break our machines, the British and the American, it would have been a different story. But the Sagaba, which was around the same era as the Enigma, was far superior in its randomness and its strength. And so the vital information coming from breaks of the Japanese ciphers, the Purple, the German Enigma, the German Tunny, were being passed over this machine. And at the end of the war, when we interviewed the German and Japanese analysts, they said we didn't have any success trying to break the big machine. All of those wheel machines were based on an invention by this man, Hebburn. Kind of a Whitewaterish kind of figure, had a little trouble with money. They put him in jail, and while he was there, he invented the wire wheel or alphabet wheel rotor machine. We also have, I don't even know whether you can see, yeah, I guess, kind of. This wheel is made out of wood, and it comes from a French source. It was found in West Virginia in somebody's attic. Randomized alphabets around the time of the French Revolution. We thought maybe Jefferson invented it. Maybe he did, but the French were using it in this country, and I suspect the agent got a little disillusioned when some of his friends are getting their heads chopped off by the guillotine, and met some really lovely lady in what was then Virginia, settled down and put this in the attic. There's only one of these in the world we know of, and it's in our museum. 45 randomized wheels that are identified by a double letter combination, I think, and you can restack them every time you want to use them. So this system, without it having been seen, was reinvented in 1915 by Parker Hitt and Colonel Maboyne of the U.S. Signal Corps. Of course, the government being what it is, they didn't get it produced until 1922, and a version of it didn't show up till early World War II, called the M94. But that's how strong it was even in early World War II. Well, that's a flavor of cryptology and its impact on us. Now, of course, we read in the papers that it's such a wonderful topic that bin Laden is bragging that he's using his millions to partially finance the use of cryptography and steganography and the internet, some of our favorite websites. They mentioned sports sites and pornographic sites. In any case, to send descriptions, orders, and designs for bombs to various terrorists throughout the world, our allies and ourselves, using advanced cryptography techniques in networks. Now I'm going to change topic. Russian organized crime is really not the full topic. It's kind of more intriguing because some of the wildest individuals and most violent people on the planet turn out to be some of our Russian mafia representatives, which began coming into this country much like the Muriel boat lift. These guys started coming over here, being sent by the KGB at the fall of the Soviet Empire in the late 70s. Theodore Ronka, an attorney from New York, former Vietnam interrogations officer, this attorney works on insurance and including insurance fraud. And he said, you know, they started as soon as they got here with all kinds of insurance, Medicare frauds, and this sort of thing. He said the first thing that startled me was an ex-KGB guy who came in to see me about his Social Security retirement. They didn't have the money to pay retirement. They sent him over to Brighton Beach. And he said, you know, veterans are getting a 5% raise. Veterans of World War II. This is a wonderful thing for me. He said, Sergey, were you in the American Army in World War II? No, Soviet Army. I love America. It's a wonderful place. And even though this says Russian organized crime, we see a lot of other folks here. The Russians, the Colombians, the folks, the Comorans from Naples, the Sicilians have made treaties, the intelligence department of the Syrians, and these new virtual countries, very large organized crime entities that overlap with governments, the same kind of situation you have in old Russia, where most of the banks are owned or controlled by the mafia, actually exists in modern China. This is on the internet. This is in congressional testimony. The triads bragged to an acquaintance of mine who was a businessman of Rockwell International, operating out of China and Hong Kong several years ago, that they ran the economy in the southern part of China because when the Chinese needed businessmen, where'd they go? Hong Kong. Who runs Hong Kong? And now they run the economy. Recently, just about 2 weeks ago, Reuters article, the government, and this is like the third really big scandal that involved party people and people in the army. The government arrested top party members and the police in Shenyang City, which is the 5th largest city in China, about 3 million, 4 million people. And the comment was, the government is pervaded by organized crime, and in many cases, in the large cities, the economy is run by the organized crime. Frank Viviano wrote an article about 3 years ago. It was on the internet. He went to Fuzhou City, which is the Salerno of China. And he was being given a guided tour by the Sun Yian Triad representative, who was praising his boss, who had a beautiful new 11-story, whatever it was, glass steel building. and he runs a beautiful city. And he said he's pro-democracy. Tiananmen Square. He says, why is he not dead? He said, you see those Ferraris, Mercedes down there? Oh, yeah, down the parking lot. He said, what side is the steering wheel on? The British side, Hong Kong side. That's forbidden in China. Nobody's going to arrest them. They're the party officials. And he said, look, over there is a big billboard. You know what it says? No, I don't read Chinese. He said, it says, direct flights to San Francisco and Las Vegas, American dollars only. A similar article, Shanghai, the New York of China, and I can't remember, the guy's name was Palmer, and I don't remember whether it was an AP story or not, but he was interviewing an acquaintance of him in the People's Liberation Army. Took him to this beautiful new hotel. The whole top floor was a casino, $100 hookers, you know, this kind of thing. And he said, wow, look at this. Isn't this criminal activity kind of, I thought you guys are supposed to oversee criminal activity. And the man smiled. He said, what better way to oversee it than to be partners with them? Well, who's your partner? The Sun Yat triad. These people began moving out several years before 1997. They're all over Europe. They own a good part of Vancouver, and I understand from a Canadian, Ottawa, or Montreal, Ottawa, kind of surprised me. And of course, they are down into the United States, all over the place. So we have organized crime, for example. New York City has all of these players that you see here. And they're also in Washington, D.C. We have, in our region, 12 international criminal organizations. The Kung Lok Triad, for example, in New York ran a little trouble with the law, so they went down to their friends in the Dominican Republic and became citizens for $35,000, and they run the money laundering down there. The Dominican organized crime in New York is very sophisticated and sends van loads of heroin down the East Coast. To give you an idea of the size of that community of people that live there, there's 700,000. That's like a small city. And investigations of the cartel, the Dominican cartel, which, by the way, is pretty much run by the Dominican Revolutionary Party, old caste-right, violently anti-American party, now in business for themselves. They found out that not only did they do heroin, but at the low end of money laundering, using coupons from their many grocery stores, they were providing money to the folks who were buying the explosives for the World Trade Center bombing. The Abbott family, about 4 years ago, this is an Arabic family, but they were caught doing extortion. They were also caught collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars for Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and doing drugs. The An Liang Tong and the Hip Sing Tong in New York both have very violent street gangs associated with them. One of them is actually broken off and is working for another triad. What the heck was the name of it? Wo Hap To triad out of Hong Kong. It's called the Wa Ching. People from San Francisco and Los Angeles are very familiar with the Wa Ching, and there are many smuggling operations and heroin operations. But you have the Hip Sing and the An Liang in New York and also in Baltimore. An Liang has associated with it the Ghost Shadows, who are a violent street gang. Let's see, who do we know? The Cubans, yes, they are with us. Mexican organized crime, that's where we get most of our cocaine and our marijuana up from Texas, New Mexico, on up into New York and Washington, D.C. Let's see, who did I miss? We have the whole Caribbean crowd, Puerto Ricans. One of the most capable of organized crime groups is the folks from Nigeria. They are wizards with computers. They are great at credit card fraud. They've entertained some of the folks here in Los Angeles with their credit card fraud. and they can counterfeit documents so fast and so well that they surprised the Treasury with how quickly they did the new bills. They are known in the heroin trade as body carriers. They carry a lot of it. Comes from the Far East, through Ghana, through Nigeria, into Washington, D.C., into Baltimore, into the East Coast, and so on and so forth. Now, many of these organized crime groups overlap with governments, overlap with terrorist governments, overlap with their own governments. They'll smuggle anything. They don't just smuggle drugs. You can decriminalize drugs all you want to. These people are still not going to lose any money because they're doing weapons. One of my favorite people was a guy named Ludwig Feinberg, called Tarzan, ran Porky's down in Miami. And it was the great watering house for the Russian mob. What he was also doing, and was caught by the FBI, was he was brokering tons of cocaine into Eastern Europe. And then he went up and brokered tons of weapons, AK-47s, Mi-8 helicopters, shoulder-fired missiles to the FARC. Who are who? The people we're a little concerned about who run the army for the drug traffickers in Colombia and the ELN. And not too long ago, they had a lovely discovery in the mountains of Colombia. What was being manufactured by Russian and American technicians? Submarines. The Mexican cartels, the Colombians, have the benefit of some of the highest tech available. They don't have to go through a procurement cycle. The Tijuana cartel, which runs that part of Mexico, has 5 intercept sites in 5 cities. They buy the latest scanning equipment, and that includes not only scanning for cell phones, but other kinds of pagers and so on and so forth that belong to law enforcement. Recently, we have found a number of organized crime organizations have bought up cell phone companies, little ones, and they get the list of all of the frequencies, including all pertinent military and police frequencies. Many of your retired military personnel, some of ours, some of the East European, are working for these organizations. They also do high-tech theft. Korean organized crime is very good and been caught at not only doing heroin, but high-tech theft. So they're a corporate threat. Many of these outfits are also corporate threats. There's a kind of a poster child of threat to cybersecurity. It's about 4 years ago. Arno Borgrov wrote the article based on a Secret Service source. Some organization was getting into American computer systems and taking both money and corporate information that was considered rather valuable. They took $300 million worth of information in 2 months. That's almost real money. So when Secret Service went after him, you know, you've read the Cliff Stoll book, right? You know how that works. You go out, when did the password, what, you know, what is it TimeNet that they're using, what ServiceNet, da-da-da-da, and they worked their way back to Austria, back to Russia. And as they were coming close to the source, they ran into an encryption system, they broke through that, and then they began to interrogate the system. Well, they didn't know there was an automatic audit trail, but they found out very quickly because the system fired back a virus that took out the Secret Service computer. So if you don't have an offensive and defensive system where you have a vulnerability in modern corporate America, then you're not quite up to the level of the Russian mafia. Probably the greatest example of threat to economy that we have is this. Some of you probably have heard about it. There isn't, I don't think, another example of this being laid out graphically. YBM Magnex was a multi-billion-dollar money laundering investment fraud, which included inflated dollars being put into pension funds and mutual funds in Canada. That's bedrock stuff. You got inflated dollars on that, and you pull them out, what happens? Particularly if there's a lot of it, right? You're talking about a threat to the international economy. These boys, of course, in Russia, the mafia and the KGB started back in the 70s, since they understood the collapse of the economy was taking place and started looting what was left of the Soviet Union and investing it and hiding it all throughout the Western world, so that when it came time to privatize, guess who had the money to buy up the old state industries? So that's why, unfortunately, most of the Russian economy is in the hands of corrupt old officials and mafia criminals and old KGB boys. One of the most violent and threatening people in Russian organized crime you've seen recently is a man named Semyon Mikhailovich. Semyon Mikhailovich has a PhD in economics. He has his own intercept organization, his own security organization, KGB, sophisticated computer security, da-da-da-da. He was operating out of Hungary. That was his headquarters. But what he did first was he tried his luck with an outfit called Arbet International, working both Russian and Ukrainian government organization with a fee for service. You give me $5 million and I'll bring the food in, or whatever it was. And then he didn't bring the food in. So he got enough money there to buy up the arms industry of Hungary. And his minions also bought up a large magnet company called Magnex. It was money laundering money from arms shipments out of the far reaches of Russia where the people were starving to death, and they would sell their arms, and they would go through a place in Chechnya called Grozny to anybody who wanted to buy the sophisticated weapons, all of our worst terrorist nations. And he bought an airline so he could get his share of the heroin market into Europe. This was not a minor player. He went through a Channel Islands organization to move his money because there was not the usual barrier of laws that prevented him from moving large sums of money. And he used this jumping off place to finance other operations, including Aragon Company Limited in the UK. British intelligence and Scotland Yard began to realize how much it was kind of too big to hide the elephant. And look at the names of some of these phony investment companies. Limey Gold, L-I-M-E-G-O. I mean, is this putting it in your eye and doing this? How about Create and Berry? Create Berry? And he got around the British by using a loophole in the law that said your law firm doesn't have to report money it handles for you. So he put millions in their hands, and they put it through the National Bank of Scotland. Having been so successful here, he went to a kind of free-for-all stock market in Ottawa. And when he got up there, he started out with a holding company called Practex. Using that as a vehicle, he put YBM Magnex in there, and the same kind of process was going through this Argon Company Limited, the Channel Islands. The money was coming in and moving, and the Canadians were putting more money into what appeared to be a very good stock. Much of it was being laundered through Cayman Islands, a thing called United Trade Limited, which was a name, United Trade, he took from one of his investment companies in the home base of Hungary. It wasn't until, though the British had warned the Canadians, it wasn't until the Americans, everybody you can think of, INS, FBI, came down upon the headquarters of YBM Magnex in Newtown, PA, where through a couple of investment companies, Alpha Financial and Jefferson Gersh, they were moving a lot of money in Maryland, Delaware, as well as Pennsylvania, and promising to deliver all kinds of magnets, which of course never showed up. Even scammed $100 million out of the Chinese government. Fee for service. Mr. Bogatine, who was the president of YBM Magnex and the offices in Newtown, PA, used to be an engineer working for a secret government military research facility in the former Soviet Union, but now he's an American citizen. And of course, they came down upon him and took all his files, and the next day, the stock was stopped in being traded on the market in Ottawa, and the whole thing started cascading. Well, just when you thought it was over, it's just like watching what's going on with the former president. Just when you thought it was all uncovered, some more stuff slid out, and we have Lucy Edwards, who happened to be married to a Russian guy who was moving money in London, being caught, one of two vice presidents of the New York City Bank. Oops, money laundering, gee, it was only $8 billion, right? Now, when these folks go into money laundering, and in New York, for example, they are tied in with all five of the Sicilian families. The great $8 billion fuel fraud fund, they had to pay 1 cent a gallon to the Genovese family. Okay. The $2 billion Medicare fraud, much of that hit California as well as the fuel fraud. These people are amazing. Nothing is $1 million. What's that? That's pocket change. As I say, you have these international criminal organizations overlapping in many cases with terrorist organizations and feeding them military supplies, weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, so on and so forth. So it's hard to tell the difference where one stops and the other begins. Is there corruption in our own government? Do you watch TV? Right, okay. So we live in a world where you have these virtual countries overlapping and operating on 5 continents. It's not just the Russians, not just the Chinese. You can go down the list to large numbers of the Colombians, the Sicilian, Saint Camorra. Our KLA friends, I don't know what they're doing now in terms of moving heroin for the Afghanis, but before the Civil War, out of Pristina, they were moving 4 tons a month into Europe. Okay? So, are they going to attack computer systems? Are they attacking computer? We saw bin Laden, we just saw this recently, bragging about using computer technology, as we mentioned, encryption websites to pass and set up terrorist operations, right? The threat is far more varied and multifaceted than we imagine. And indeed, Semyon Mogilevich, the head of the Red Mafia, who, by the way, was forbidden coming to the United States, but he came out of Israel, which unfortunately has a preponderance of these former Russian, quote, Jews. They're not Jews, except they had a relative who was Jewish. They came in and they really took over a lot of organized crime and threatened the state of Israel, according to Mossad. And this is a guy who came out of there when he's forbidden to come from Hungary, went into New York to visit his old friend Vyacheslav Ivanko, the man that organized the anthrax explosion, right? And killed a lot of Chechens for the mob. And finally, my friend Vyacheslav Ivanko, one of the most dangerous men on the planet. He killed so many people in Russia, they told him to go to America and invade it. He was killing Chechens for the mob. They were too tough. Well, that's it quick and dirty. Thank you very much.